I never thought coming home from my first successful business trip would end with finding my life packed in garbage bags. The black plastic bulged with my possessions lined up like funeral monuments at our front gate, her words sliced sharper than any courtroom exchange. A final twist in the family drama I thought was over. I've lived in this little Oregon town my whole life. All 31 years of it. My name is Amelia Ross. And on mornings like this, I feel both a part of it and apart from it. The air carried that damp chill that seeps into your bones. The kind of autumn cold that paints the maple leaves in shades of red and gold before scattering them along the sidewalk. From the kitchen window, I watched them tumble, one by one, while the coffee pot hissed behind me. The kitchen was my domain in the mornings. I measured the coffee grounds with the same precision I used at work, watching the dark liquid fill the pot. My job as a financial specialist downtown paid well enough to make most people in this town comfortable. People trusted me to help them make sense of their money. And I was good at it. But it's easier to balance someone else's books than it is to balance your own life. I still lived in my parents' house. Some would call it sensible. No rent meant more savings. And I told myself it was the smart choice. But the truth had more layers. I'd always believed that family was supposed to be the anchor you held onto. The place you came back to when the world felt unsteady. Maybe I thought living under the same roof meant we'd be closer. Lately, though, that belief felt like a story I told myself to make the arrangement easier to swallow. I set 2 mugs on the counter and called out a soft, "Morning?" My voice filling the quiet. My mother, Elaine, sat at the table with the newspaper, her eyes fixed on the print, never glancing up. My younger brother, Ethan, hunched over his phone, his cereal spoon clinking rhythmically against the bowl. The television murmured from the corner, its cheerful chatter at odds with the stillness in the room. I wrapped my hands around my mug, letting the heat soak into my skin, and tried to ignore how quickly the silence closed in again. Outside, the sunlight brushed the tops of the houses across the street, making them look warmer than they felt. In this house, warmth was something you had to imagine. One wrong word, one wrong look, and it could vanish. Elaine finally folded her newspaper and looked up, her eyes sweeping over me in that slow, measuring way she had. "You know, Amelia," she said, "I saw Carol's daughter on Facebook yesterday. Just bought her second house in Portland. Married. 2 kids. And she still manages to keep a figure. You could learn a thing or two from her." I forced a small smile. The kind you put on when you've already heard the punchline, but you let the other person think it's fresh. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Ethan didn't even glance up from his phone. "Speaking of houses," he muttered, "how's that little project you've been bragging about? What was it again, some finance thing? But it's just like your last big plan that went nowhere." His lips curled into a smirk, like he'd been saving the line all morning. I took a breath and let it out slowly, reminding myself not to rise to it. Over the years, I'd learned that defending myself was just an invitation for them to double down. Still, part of me hoped maybe today would be different, that they might surprise me. The sound of heels clicking on the hardwood announced Lily before I even saw her. My older sister swept into the kitchen like she owned it, dressed in a sharp blazer, even though it was only mid-morning. She glanced at me and gave a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Amelia," she said in that sing-song voice she used when she wanted to remind you she knew more than you. "I ran into Mrs. Caldwell yesterday. She asked if you were still living here. I told her you were saving money. Of course. But she gave me that look. You know? Poor thing. She probably thinks you're stuck." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. And I could feel the flush creeping up my neck. I wanted to say something. To remind them that I had a career. That I was making choices that made sense to me. But I just nodded and took another sip of coffee. I'm letting the heat burn my tongue so I wouldn't say anything I'd regret. It's funny how hope works. You can wake up thinking maybe this will be the day they see you. The real you. Not the version they've created in their heads. But then, with a few words and a few smirks, that hope crumbles. Imagine realizing the people you loved most were rooting for your downfall. A week later, I was on my way home from a 3-day business trip. The client meetings had gone better than expected, but the travel had worn me down. My suitcase rolled unevenly behind me as I walked through the small regional airport, the echo of my steps following me out into the cool Oregon air. The drive back into town was familiar enough to make me feel like I could close my eyes and let muscle memory take over. Rows of tall pines line the winding roads, their branches swaying in the early afternoon breeze. A few stubborn leaves clung to the branches, while others scattered across the road in front of my car. That golden autumn light made everything look softer. Almost kinder. As I turned down Maple Street, the houses came into view, one by one, each with its own little story. Mrs. Klein was out front, raking leaves into neat piles, her small dog darting around her feet. She waved when she saw me, and I slowed down to return it. Across the way, Mr. Harris sat on his porch with a cup of tea, nodding as I passed. These were the kinds of greetings that made the town feel smaller in a good way. The kind of place where people noticed if you weren't around for a while. The closer I got to home, the more the tension in my shoulders eased. I imagined setting my suitcase down in the hallway, changing into something comfortable, maybe making tea and sitting by the window. 3 days of hotel rooms and polite small talk had left me craving the quiet of my own space. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. The late afternoon light hit the house just right, casting long shadows across the yard. For a moment, I just sat there, letting the engine's ticking fade into the silence. It felt good to be back. Like, maybe this would be one of those rare weekends when the air in the house didn't feel heavy. Grabbing my bag from the trunk, I took a deep breath and stepped toward the front porch. There was no reason to expect anything unusual, no hint of what was waiting for me on the other side of the fence. In fact, I remember feeling grateful for the stillness, the way the neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath in the fading light. The walkway to the front door was lined with potted chrysanthemums my mother had placed there earlier in the season. Their deep burgundy petals caught the sunlight, and I thought about how pretty they'd look in a photograph. It was the kind of simple, quiet beauty I wanted to hold on to for just a little longer before I stepped inside. I reached the gate and put my hand on the latch, thinking about how good it would feel to drop my bag and finally be home. In that instant, I had no idea that the image in my mind, the warm kitchen, the soft light, would shatter before I could even take another step. The latch clicked under my hand, and when I pushed the gate open, the first thing I saw was my suitcase, not the one I had just carried from the trunk, but the old one I kept in my closet, sitting on the porch like it had been waiting for me. Next to it were cardboard boxes stacked in an uneven tower, some bulging at the sides, others with the tape barely holding. My winter coat hung over the railing, limp and out of place. For a moment, my mind didn't connect the image to reality. I thought maybe someone was moving furniture, or we were clearing out space for a project. Then I saw the framed photographs, my photographs propped haphazardly on top of the boxes. A crystal vase I'd bought with my first paycheck lay on its side. The lip chipped. I froze on the path, my hands still resting on the gate. The front door was wide open, and in the doorway stood Elaine, a phone held high in front of her face. She angled it toward me like she was framing a shot, her smile sharp and unnatural. Beside her, Lily leaned against the doorframe, tilting her head with the same look she used in high school when she'd beaten me at something and wanted to make sure I knew it. "Oh, look who's back," Lily said, her voice carrying down the steps. Perfect timing. I felt the heat rising to my cheeks. but I couldn't make my feet move. A couple of neighbors had stopped on the sidewalk, pretending to check their mail or fiddle with their jackets. Mrs. Klein's rake lay forgotten in the grass as she lingered near the curb. Then my father stepped into view. Robert Ross had always been a man of few words, but his presence filled the space between us like a wall. He didn't look at me the way you look at your child coming home. His eyes were hard, fixed, as if he were staring down a stranger. In one hand, he held the brass house key I'd carried since I was 16. Without a word, he tossed it. The key clinked against the concrete before sliding toward my shoes. "You're on your own now," he said, his voice flat and final. The words hit harder than the metal ever could. Around us, the silence stretched thin, broken only by the faint hum of Elaine's phone recording. I glanced at the boxes again, at the scattered pieces of my life now exposed to anyone passing by. I bent down, picked up the key, and held it in my palm. It felt small, almost weightless, yet it might as well have been a stone pressing into my skin. I didn't say anything, not to him, not to them. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, and I was afraid that if I spoke, my voice would betray me. The wind caught the edge of my coat, lifting it slightly, and I had the sudden, absurd thought that it might just blow away. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Whatever was left between us wasn't family. Not anymore. I was still standing on the path, the key pressed into my palm. When Elaine's voice broke the silence, she finally decided to show up. She said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. After disappearing for weeks, leaving us to handle everything. Typical. I turned my head slowly toward her. Her phone was still up. Red recording, light blinking, capturing every breath I took. Lily stepped forward then, folding her arms with a mock sigh. "You know what's really sad," she said, glancing toward Mrs. Klein and the others gathered at the curb. "She's always been like this. Selfish. Never cared about anyone but herself. Mom used to cry about it all the time." The words landed like stones against my chest. My grip on the key tightened until I felt the edges dig into my skin. I didn't flinch. Robert's voice cut in, calm but deliberate. The kind of tone that didn't need to rise to be dangerous. "We've done more than enough for you, Amelia. And how do you repay us? By walking away. By acting like we owe you." And I could hear a neighbor's muffled gasp. Someone shifting their weight on the pavement. These weren't just words. They were a performance. And the audience was lapping it up. Elaine stepped down from the porch, circling closer, her voice dripping with false pity. "We put a roof over your head. Gave you every chance to succeed. And you can't even say thank you." My mouth clenched. I could feel the muscle twitching near my ear. Part of me wanted to shout, to tell them the truth that I had never disappeared, that my trip was for work, that I had done everything I could to help this family, even when it cost me. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They weren't speaking to me. They were speaking to the cameras, to the neighbors, to anyone who would carry their version of the story. Lily gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "You know what the worst part is? She acts like she's the victim, always the martyr." Oh, my vision tunneled, the edges blurring. But I kept my posture steady. The air was cool against my skin, though my body felt hot, like I was standing too close to a fire. "I think it's time you left," Robert said finally, his eyes narrowing. "You've taken enough from this family." Oh, I swallowed hard, my throat like sandpaper. The words I might have said, the defense I might have made, stayed locked behind my teeth. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Without a word, I bent to pick up the nearest box. My fingers closed around the cardboard, the weight heavier than it should have been. I straightened, met Robert's eyes for a brief second, and then turned away. I didn't cry. Not then, not in front of them, but the echo of their voices, the cruel precision of their lies, followed me down the path, settling into a place inside me I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to clear. By the time I reached the end of the street, my arms were burning from the weight of the box. I set it down on the curb and took a breath that didn't seem to go all the way in. The sound of tires crunching over gravel made me look up. A silver sedan pulled to the side, and Harper stepped out before the engine had even settled. She looked at me with the kind of concern that made me want to collapse right there. "Get in?" she said gently, glancing toward the house I'd just left. "I saw enough to know you don't need to be standing here 1 second longer." How? I didn't argue. We loaded the box into her trunk, and I slid into the passenger seat. The warmth of the car felt almost foreign after the chill outside. Harper didn't ask questions right away. She drove in silence, giving me space to breathe. When we reached her place, a small bungalow with a front porch that smelled faintly of cinnamon, she led me inside and handed me a mug of tea. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the steam soften the tightness in my chest. "There's something I've been holding for you," she said finally, setting her own mug down. "Your grandfather Samuel gave it to me before he passed. Told me to wait until I thought you really needed it." And she crossed the room to a side table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written across it in his bold, steady handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't move. The sight of it pulled me back to summer mornings at the lake. His booming laugh, the way he'd pat my shoulder as if to remind me I was never truly alone. I took the envelope, my fingers brushing over the familiar script. The weight of it was substantial, and something inside shifted against the paper. I glanced up at Harper. She just nodded. The seal cracked easily. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller packet of documents bound with a thin ribbon. I opened the packet first. My eyes scanned the words slowly. I'm not trusting what I thought I was reading. Deed of ownership, Lakeshore Cottage. Pinewood County. Deed of ownership, commercial building. 412 Main Street. I blinked. Reading them again, my mind tried to reconcile the paper in my hands with the reality I'd been living, the boxes on the porch, the accusations, the humiliation. "He left these to me," I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "He wanted you to have something that no one could take away from you." Harper said, "He told me once, Amelia's going to need a place that's hers, not theirs." The room felt different suddenly, as if the light had shifted. I looked down at the documents again. The black ink crisp against the pale paper. For the first time in days, my heart didn't feel like it was sinking. I wasn't sure yet what it meant for my future. But I knew one thing. I wasn't as cornered as they wanted me to believe. I was still sitting at Harper's kitchen table. The documents spread in front of me like proof that maybe, just maybe, the universe hadn't forgotten me entirely. Harper watched me for a moment, then pushed her chair back. "There's something else," she said. Disappearing down the hallway, she came back with a small black flash drive. This was inside the envelope too. "I think you should see it now." Then, my throat tightened. Harper slid her laptop across the table and plugged it in. A folder popped open, with a single video file titled "For Amelia." I clicked play. The screen flickered, and there he was, Grandpa Samuel sitting in his favorite armchair. The plaid one by the window that always smelled faintly of cedar. He looked a little older than my most recent memories, but his eyes still carried that same spark. "Well, Kiddo," he began, smiling softly. "If you're watching this, then I guess I'm not around to say these things in person. And knowing me, I'd get choked up halfway through anyway. I could almost hear Harper's kettle whistling in the background of my memory. But I forced myself to stay in the moment. "You've got a good heart, Amelia. He continued. But I worry sometimes you let people mistake that kindness for weakness. There are folks in this world, and maybe even in your own family, who only smile when you stumble. Don't give them that satisfaction. His tone shifted slightly, becoming firmer. I've seen you shrink yourself to keep the peace. I've watched you take blame that wasn't yours, just so the room wouldn't erupt. That's not the life I want for you. Self-respect isn't about being loud or brash. It's about knowing your worth and never letting anyone convince you otherwise. I felt my eyes sting. He leaned forward in his chair, as if he could bridge the distance between then and now. These properties, they're not just real estate. They're your foothold. A place to plant yourself when the rest of the world feels like it's sliding out from under you. And if someone tries to take them from you, you fight. You fight fair. You fight smart. But you fight. Oh, the lump in my throat was almost too much. He smiled again. Softer this time. You're stronger than you think. My dear. Oh, the screen went black. For a moment, I just sat there. The quiet of the kitchen pressing in. Harper reached over and squeezed my hand. But she didn't speak. She didn't have to. I thought of the last 48 hours, the shouting, the accusations, the way I'd walked away, carrying only a box, and the bitter taste of defeat. Now, sitting here, I realized I wasn't empty-handed. I had proof. I had a foundation. And I had a voice that, even from beyond the grave, I told me I was worth defending. Something in me shifted. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but it hardened into something steadier, sharper. Determination. I closed the laptop and pushed the documents closer to me. All right, I said quietly, almost to myself. Let's see exactly what I've got here. The next morning, Harper insisted on driving me into town. She had already called ahead and set up an appointment with a lawyer she trusted, Jordan Whitmore. I'd heard his name before. In a place like Lakewood, reputation traveled faster than the mail. And his was the kind you wanted on your side. His office sat on the second floor of a brick building just off Main Street. The kind of place where sunlight streamed through tall windows and the air smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Jordan stood as we walked in, offering a handshake that was firm without being overbearing. Amelia, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Harper stayed beside me, a steady presence. I handed him the manila folder with the property deeds and leases. He spread them out across his desk like pieces of a puzzle. For the first several minutes, he read in silence, flipping between pages, scribbling notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad. I tried to read his expression, but his face was all business. Finally, he looked up. How long have your relatives been managing these properties? Since my grandfather passed away. About 8 years ago. I said, I never saw any rental income. Though I was told it was being reinvested for maintenance. I'm soaked. Jordan nodded slowly, tapping the papers with his pen. That's not what happened. These are the lease agreements for the commercial building. And from what I can see, the tenants have been paying substantial rent every single month directly to an account your relatives control. We're talking about years of income that never reached you. I'm soaked. The words landed heavy, but not with the sting I expected. Instead, I felt a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the cold shoulders, the quick subject changes whenever finances came up. They had been taking what was mine and doing it behind the polite facade of family business. Ardo, can we prove it? I asked. Jordan gave a faint smile. Oh, we can do better than that. We can trace every payment, and once we do, they'll have to explain why your name was left off the bank records. And for me. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. The good news is, you have clear title to both properties. That's solid ground to stand on. The bad news, Or maybe I should say the messy part is that confronting them is going to get ugly. They won't just hand over what's owed without a fight. I glanced at Harper, who gave me the smallest nod. I turned back to Jordan. Then we fight smart. He began outlining a strategy. First, we'd secure all the property records and make official copies. Next, he'd send a formal demand letter, citing the lease agreements and unpaid distributions. If they refused, which he expected they would, we'd move forward with a civil suit. As the plan took shape, the chaos of the last few days began to feel less like a storm and more like a map I could follow. I walked into that office unsure of what I really had. I walked out knowing exactly where I stood and exactly what I was going to do. It didn't take long for word to reach them. Jordan sent the demand letter on a Tuesday morning, and by that evening, my phone lit up with the first text from Elaine. "You're making a mistake you can't undo?" It read, "No greeting. No signature, just cold." Clipped words that carried the kind of venom only family can deliver. I stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down. In the past, that kind of message would have made my stomach twist. I would have me pacing the kitchen rehearsing what I might say to smooth things over. But not now. I wasn't the same person they thought they could push around. I let the message sit unanswered. The next morning brought more. Elaine's tone shifted from threatening to condescending. "Family doesn't sue family. Amelia, this is beneath you." Then another. Only minutes later, "We'll make sure everyone knows how ungrateful you are." I didn't reply to any of them. Jordan's advice had been clear: don't engage. Don't give them an opening. Silence, he said, was sometimes the sharpest blade. By Thursday, the tension began to take a different form. I was in my small downtown office, the one on the second floor of the building I now knew I owned, when the front desk buzzed to tell me someone was demanding to see me. I walked out to find Lily. Cheeks flushed, hair wild from the winter wind, her voice already raised loud enough for the other tenants to hear. "You think you can just steal what's ours?" she shouted, ignoring the receptionist's attempts to calm her. "After everything we've done for you?" Her words weren't for me, not really. They were for the audience gathering in the hallway. The curious eyes peeking out of open doors. She wanted a scene, and she was getting one. I kept my voice even. "Lily, you need to leave." She took a step closer, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "You've been poisoned against us. That lawyer of yours is filling your head with lies. Grandpa would be ashamed of you." That one stung not because I believed her, but because I knew exactly how much my grandfather had loved me. Using his name as a weapon was a new low, even for her. I glanced at the security camera in the corner and spoke clearly enough for the mic to pick it up. "I'm asking you to leave. Now." And when she didn't move, I reached for the phone on the receptionist's desk and called building security. The guard arrived within minutes. A tall man in a navy jacket who didn't need to raise his voice. He simply stood beside her and gestured toward the exit. "You'll regret this," she spat as she was escorted out. The elevator doors closed on her glare. I returned to my office and shut the door. My hands steady, my breathing even. For the first time, I realized they weren't in control anymore. They could shout in the hallway, send threats over text, try to drag my name through every small-town conversation, but the foundation of what I had now was solid. I had truth. I had proof. And I had the law on my side. That night, more messages came shorter, sharper, almost disparity. They knew the walls were closing in. I could feel the shift. The way a storm feels before the first crack of thunder. The war had started quietly, but now the noise was unavoidable, and I was ready for it. By the following Monday, Jordan had them exactly where he wanted. Weeks of silence from my end and relentless precision from his had cornered them. Every letter he sent was another nail in the box they'd built for themselves. Now, it was time to close it. We met in a neutral conference room at his firm. The blinds were drawn. Of the table, a polished slab of dark wood that reflected the pale winter light. I sat beside Jordan, my hands folded in my lap, while Elaine and Lily took the seats opposite. They looked smaller than I remembered, like people who'd been carrying a weight they couldn't put down. Jordan wasted no time. He slid a folder across the table and spoke in that calm, steady voice of his. Here are the calculations. Principal. Back rent. Interest at the legal rate for each year. You withheld payment. You'll find it totals to the cent. Elaine opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. Don't. We have the leases, the bank records, and Amelia's grandfather's original agreements. This isn't a negotiation. This is restitution. The air felt dense, heavy with the quiet sound of paper shifting as they flipped through the documents. Lily leaned over to whisper something to Elaine, but Jordan pressed on. In addition to the payment, he said, you will sign this acknowledgement. He pulled a single sheet from the folder and placed it between them. It states you took funds that did not belong to you, that you have no legal claim to the property or its income, and that you accept full responsibility for your actions. And rest. Elaine's face flushed. You want us to humiliate ourselves on paper? Jordan's eyes didn't waver. I want the truth in writing. Amelia deserves that. And, if you refuse, we'll let the court make it public instead. His fam. For a moment, no one spoke. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then, in a voice so low, it was almost a hiss, Lily muttered, we should just sign it. How in seven? Elaine turned sharply toward her. But the fight in her eyes was already dimming. She picked up the pen Jordan had placed in front of her, hesitating for only a second before scrawling her name at the bottom. The sound of it, the scratch of ink on paper, felt louder than it should have. Lily followed, her signature tight and slanted, as if she could somehow hide her resentment in the handwriting. Jordan retrieved the document, slid it into his folder, and then passed them the payment instructions. You have 5 business days to wire the full amount. If it's late, the interest keeps ticking. And so, they didn't argue. Not anymore. The bitterness in their expressions was obvious. But so was the defeat. When the meeting ended, they left quickly, not looking back. I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the reality of it sink in. The years of manipulation, the quiet theft. In the nights I'd spent wondering if I was imagining it all. It was over. And not just over in my heart, over in black and white, signed by their own hands. As Jordan closed his folder, he gave me a small smile. Justice doesn't always roar, Amelia. Sometimes it just signs its name. Walking out of that room, I felt taller. The world outside was still gray and cold, but the air tasted cleaner somehow. We had stripped away their lies to force them to face the truth, and made them put it on record. That was more than money. That was vindication. 5 days later, the wire transfer hit my account. I checked the numbers 3 times before letting myself breathe. It was all there. The principal, the years of unpaid rent, and the interest Jordan had calculated down to the penny. For the first time in what felt like forever, the balance sheet of my life wasn't tilted against me. A week after that, I moved into my new apartment. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was mine. The walls were freshly painted a soft cream, and the wide windows let in a flood of afternoon light. I stood in the center of the living room that first day, surrounded by boxes, and just listened to the quiet. No one's footsteps in the hall, no voices behind closed doors, no undercurrent of tension, waiting to pull me under. Just space, air, and the hum of the city outside. The first envelope from the property manager arrived a few days later. Inside was the initial distribution from the building's rental income. My building now, it wasn't a fortune, but it was steady. Honest income. The kind my grandfather had intended for me all along. I held the check in my hands longer than I needed to, thinking about how far it had come and how much had been stolen before this moment. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and opened a letter from my mother. The handwriting was familiar. The words less so. It was full of justifications, old grievances, and explanations for why things had been more complicated than I understood. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the choices she had made. I read it once, folded it neatly, and slid it back into the envelope. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. If anything, it confirmed something I'd already learned. Closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from the life you build without them. The next day, I found the old USB drive Jordan had returned to me along with my grandfather's papers. On it was the final video he'd recorded before his health declined. I hadn't been ready to watch it until now. He appeared on the screen in his favorite cardigan, sitting in that worn leather chair I remembered so well. His voice was gentle but steady. "Amelia," he said, "life will test you in ways you can't imagine. People you trust may try to break you, but never let those who break you decide who you are." I didn't cry. Not exactly. But something inside me loosened, like a knot that had been there for years. I watched the clip twice, then set the laptop aside and went to stand by the window. The sun was setting, streaking the sky with gold and rose, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be,